Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently it occurred to me that I haven't been using HF in my shack for much longer than I'd care to admit. Over the years I've spoken about my shack and how it's set up. More on that shortly. I effectively went off air when I decommissioned the computer that was running tools like fldigi and WSJT-X, mainly because it was too slow, for example taking a good minute to launch a copy of Firefox. After that, I repurposed my HF antenna for use with my ultra-low-power whisper beacon experiments, and essentially ceased being a functional HF station. There's other forces at work, which I'll get to, but before I do, in discussion with a fellow amateur, we discovered that my desire to get back on air on HF is essentially the same journey that a new amateur might make, and the idea was hatched to document the process and share it with you. In the past, you've heard me say that the answer to most questions associated with amateur radio is, it depends. As a new or returning amateur, this might not be very helpful if you don't know what it depends on. So I'm going to attempt to describe the process of determining how to get to the answers required to make a station. Now, before I start, I'd like to talk about money. I'm raising this up front because your access to a budget determines many of the choices that are open to you. You could interpret that to mean that you need money, and while that helps, it's not universally true. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that you could get on air and make noise using nothing more than a mobile phone and an internet connection, which, truth be told, is pretty much the minimum requirement to enjoy my thoughts. So perhaps that's the base requirement. That said, even if you don't have access to that, there's other options that we'll no doubt explore together. So keep that in mind. I think that the very first thing to consider is what you think of when you hear the term amateur radio. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Amateur radio is a great many things to different people. For some, it means a handheld radio and chatting with mates on the local repeater. For others, it means a full-blown HF contest station with multiple antennas and radios, with integrated logging in a dedicated building. For others, it means logging into a remote WebSDR and listening to the bands, decoding interesting signals, and license permitting transmitting remotely across the Internet. In other words, the amateur radio experience is unique to you. What you get from it is dependent on you, and nobody else. As an aside, that's also true for licensing. If you have a beginner's license, like my foundation license, then it's entirely up to you to decide if and when you add extra privileges. Foundations of Amateur Radio, well, its predecessor, What Use Is an F-Core, emerged specifically in response to amateurs around me who continue to, let's be kind and call it, encourage me to upgrade to a real license. 15 years on, I'm still a foundation beginner, and thus far I have yet to run out of things to do or talk about, so keep that in mind. I think that covers the disclaimers. No doubt more will occur to me as we continue on this journey. For the first decade or so of having a license, most of my activity was done in my car, a mobile shack of sorts. I didn't have access to a space where I could set up a radio without running the risk of someone tripping over coax, or a landlord complaining within an hour of me erecting a temporary vertical. In other words, my mobile shack was born from necessity. It was helpful in exploring the limitless variation of operating positions, as in locations and their impact on propagation, antenna performance, local interference, and plenty of other lessons. So, even if you don't have a permanent space to operate, there's plenty of amateur radio to go round. When I finally moved to a place where I had space, I started the process of putting together my shack. Initially, it was pretty much integrated with my home office. This sort of worked, but both the office and the shack suffered from this combination. So, my first observation is that, in my experience, setting aside a dedicated space for a shack is a good idea. Now, right now, as I'm telling you that, to the bottom right of my computer screen is the head of my Yaesu FT857D, connected to a remote rig, a pair of devices that replace the serial cable between the head and the radio with a network connection. The remote rig is connected to a Wi-Fi router, which runs a dedicated wireless connection across the room to the Wi-Fi router that's connected to the radio, sitting on what's left of my shack. It's how I run the weekly ftroopnet. It's sitting there because I need to be able to access my computer to make log entries and track who's next in the round-robin discussion. And as I said, I've decommissioned my shack computer. Which brings me to the second point. Setting up a shack doesn't happen in isolation. You're likely to have existing infrastructure of some sort. It might be a fixed location for power points, it might be a previously drilled hole for incoming coax, it might be a bolted bench. Whatever it is, it's something that you need to take into account. It's also something that you need to consider in terms of feasibility. Just because something is the way it is today doesn't mean that it has to stay the same for the next decade. I've previously discussed the evolution of my shack, based on a 35-year-old wooden IKEA trestle table, all of 1.2 square metres, complete with holes from taking it around Australia for several years in the back of a van. It's currently got a wire mesh shelving unit on top and a pegboard strapped to the back. The legs are adorned with power boards, and as I said, the head of my radio is on the other side of the room. There's all to say that building a shack doesn't happen in isolation. The local environment will determine what's possible and what's not. I'm not here to tell you what to do, I'm here to help you figure out what a shack looks like in your environment. Note that I've not talked in any way about what equipment to get, what, if any, antenna to install, or what else is required. These are all part of the "it depends," and I'll talk about that soon. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.